Hello and welcome back to another episode of Magnetic Masculinity Podcast, where we provide men with practical tools and strategies to bridge the gap between achievement and fulfillment so that they can live their most magnetic lives. Today we're going into the third piece of vehicle of consciousness, which is navigation system or emotions. Can we maybe start with explaining where does it fit in vehicle of consciousness and what's the importance for men to understand their navigation system or even pay attention to it?
Yeah, great. So again, what we call the magnetic masculinity blueprint, which could be like just sort of a blueprint for human success. So if you are any gender, anywhere on the spectrum listening to this could apply to you, but I do specialize in coaching men. So the magnetic masculinity blueprint, the outcome of magnetic masculinity is your best life. People might call it enlightenment, bliss. You have confidence, clarity, emotional mastery, powerful vulnerability, super fun, successful relationships, energized, inspired, inspiring to others, and living whatever your best life looks like to you, regardless of what anybody else thinks or what society expects, and feeling great with it. Doesn't mean you'll never have ups and downs. We always have ups and downs, so I'd like to clarify that. No bypassing allowed. So the recipe for the recipe for the magnetic masculinity blueprint is authentic alignment plus piloting your vehicle of consciousness, which are the two metaphors I've come up with to help my clients more quickly experience sustainable transformational results. And in our vehicle of consciousness, we have our brain, the computer, our body, the engine, needs a full tank of gas, needs proper maintenance, needs to not be overworked, and needs to have the proper fluids. The computer needs to have good software. The computer impacts all the other systems. Your heart is the battery. So even if you have a full tank of gas, but the battery isn't charged, the heart, then the vehicle is suboptimal. And if you're not working with your parts, you're not piloting the vehicle of consciousness. They are piloting you, and you are just stuck along a ride. And emotions are your navigation system in that vehicle. So your emotions help inform you whether you are in a hostile takeover from one of your subconscious parts or protection mechanisms. They help us inform us where our wounds are, what our wants, needs, values, and boundaries are, which helps us pilot that vehicle of consciousness to our authentic alignment. And the emotional navigation system in most men and a lot of humanity, to be honest, at this time, as we're evolving out of the emotional dark ages, has been shut down. Their battery hasn't been charged for a long time. They haven't been taught how to charge that battery, and they've had to shut that emotional navigation system down. Another metaphor that I learned when I was speaking to a man who runs one of the most amazing centers in the US for men addicted to pornography or sex was he explains it to men that they are given one crayon to color with, and that's anger. Or if they're not allowed anger because they were taught anger was scary, they don't really get any crayons. They might get only happy crayon, and they think that they have to only be happy. Whereas women, we can get, depending again on where you grow up and the emotional intelligence of your parents. So there are a lot of variables that I'm not addressing right now, but just to speak in generalities, women are given sadness, anger, grief, disappointment, jealousy, blame, worry, doubt, disappointed, passion, enthusiasm. We're given all these different crayons to color with, and we don't give men those crayons. They get maybe one crayon, maybe two. So another metaphor that I often say is that it's like we've cut men's emotional legs off in childhood. Then we put them out in the world and in relationships. So we're like, well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you walk up the stairs? Well, they can't walk up the stairs because we've cut their emotional legs off. And when they don't have that emotional navigation system online, they're not able to understand themselves and others, which is problematic or suboptimal because we are an emotional species, and love and belonging is the number one biological, neurological, scientifically proven need of the human experience. So when we don't give them the tools to feel love and belonging, and we teach them that they are what they produce, they are how much they make, they are how tough they can be, they are this, they are that, then they develop other strategies or other survival mechanisms to meet their needs, which are typically not the most helpful ones to allow them to connect and understand and connect to themselves and others and understand themselves and others, which means no matter how much they achieve, a lot of my clients that I work VIP one-to-one with are very high achievers. They've checked all the boxes. They're entrepreneurs, CEOs, PhDs, millionaires. They've checked all these boxes, but they tell me deep down, no matter how successful they are, no matter what they look like on the outside, inside they feel lonely, frustrated, misunderstood, and like something is missing, but they don't know what it is. So they keep chasing more achievements, and or they find themselves in burnout, or they find themselves very addicted to Twitter or pornography or food or whatever it is that they're trying to use to keep the emotions at bay. And when we're talking about emotions, another metaphor I use to help men is to remember that we are made of energy, and emotions are emotions, energy in motion. So by the very nature of energy, it is in motion. So when an emotion arises in a man's vehicle of consciousness and he freezes it or stops it, not his fault because he's been taught, what happens is it's like another metaphor I heard once. I don't know who to give credit for it, but it's one I've used and evolved over the years. Is it's like taking an inflated beach ball full of air and pushing that beach ball underwater. What does it want to do? It wants to pop up, and you have to push it down. So it's energy required to stop energy from moving. And over the years, they might have hundreds or thousands of these beach balls stuffing down, which requires a lot of energy and can make us tired, and also stagnating that energy in our engine, in that vehicle of consciousness, our bodies, can cause illness, hypertension, heart disease, stress, whatever. Now, there are obviously other things, environmental, genetic, that can cause those things. I'm not taking only one view at what causes illness in our bodies. I acknowledge we are much more complex species than that, but it definitely doesn't help us optimize our health. And it again stagnates a lot of that energy that could be freed up when we become less particle, more wave. We have more energy to spend on creative problem solving and connection, because again, they just get that dam of stuffing down all of these emotional beach balls and not allowing them to come out, and then missing out on the priceless information that those emotions contain about our authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values, or where our wounds are, or what our triggers are, and therefore prevents us from stepping into our full potential, our authentic alignment, and magnetic masculinity.
So, Brett, with those suppressed emotions, when it comes to raising or becoming more aware of them, what are some of the ways that men listening can even identify that they have been suppressing emotions, or it's something that they are doing? How does it look like, or how can they know if it's the case? Mainly because I'm thinking that if they have been given to crayons, they might not even think that or they might not even kind of be aware that they're having these patterns or some kind of behaviors, how they're like dealing with emotions, which can be suppression.
Great question. And after years of working with men, from my experience, you are right. And that was something I really had to spend months sort of exploring and thinking through. That's what I like to do with my time. I like to spend sometimes weeks at a time just pondering things and jumping into things and studying things. And I think you're right. From what men describe, they don't even know. You don't, as who was it? I think Nikola Tesla said, you don't know what you don't know until you know. So if they have not even seen the other crayons, they don't necessarily know what to look for. They don't know. I've talked to men who are describing things that they're experiencing to me, and I'm like, oh, you're experiencing jealousy, and they're like, no, I'm not. I don't feel jealous, because that's not part of their self-concept. And I'm like, no, that's definitely jealousy that you're feeling, or that's discouragement, or that's blame, or that's worry, or that's disappointment. And they're very mystified by that. So it's like teaching a new language. And I think that it's just a statistically probable likelihood that most men in most cultures at this snapshot of where we are, humanity is in evolution, might benefit from some emotional optimization or emotional intelligence training. Again, I'm generalizing, but I think that that's a fairly safe, I even found in my life that there was certain emotions that didn't fit my self-concept that I couldn't even look at. For instance, anger. So I self-identified as a very emotionally intelligent person, which I am. I was born with an extremely high EQ. So just like some people don't need to be taught mathematics or physics, I didn't need to be taught reading. I was reading books in kindergarten. I just picked it up. I was doing university level physics at a young age. There were certain things I was amazing at, and then there's certain things I was terrible at that I had to learn. So some people need to learn math, some people just know math. Some people need to learn emotions, some people just know emotions. There's no shame in it, there's no judgment. It's like some kids come out and they're like, oh, I can play the piano. They hear a song once and they can play it. Other kids like me are like, could spend 3 years and not read music. So if it was very important for me to do so, I probably could train that skill. And the thing with emotions is that it is a necessary skill. There are people that believe that a high EQ is a higher determinant of success than a high IQ. And I have worked with a lot of geniuses, Mensa members, who, again, no matter what they achieve, they're not happy and they're not socially successful, especially men that I work with that have Asperger's, can really struggle to understand other people and understand themselves, which prevents them from experiencing that human need of pure love and connection and belonging as an interdependent species.
So if men listening are even able to see that that is something that they're doing, they are suppressing some emotions or they're trying to hold those beach balls down, what is the next step after that? So they're aware to see that. They know that that's something that they're doing. What's
okay?
Kind of to clarify or get them clarity on like what to do with that.
Right. So, and I think you asked a question that I didn't fully answer in your last question, which is how do men know? So yes, I think, like I said, it's fairly safe to assume that this is probably going on for most of humanity. But also you might feel tired, numb, frustrated, unsatisfied, or constantly distracting. Another symptom of a lot of beach balls is just like men who can't sit still. They're like, okay, I have to go do this. Now I'm going to do this. I have to go for a drive. I have to turn the TV on. I have to check Twitter. I have to eat. So one way we can keep those beach balls under is eating, because our emotional brain, a lot of it is primarily in our gut. So when we eat a lot of food, it can sort of push those beach balls down for us. So that's one of the reasons that men might overeat or might overexercise, or just, again, constantly they can't sit and be with themselves because they feel uncomfortable. That would be a great KPI that there are lots of beach balls to come up. And to answer your next question, or if they've had unsuccessful, unskillful relationships, that can be another indicator that they're not skillfully communicating the relationships or skillfully identifying and communicating their emotions or feelings as well as their partners. And I mean, there could, again, be other reasons. This is just in the context we're speaking of, which is emotions. So then what do you do about it? The first thing is many men tell me they feel overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. It feels like this huge, overwhelming task. So like I said in a few episodes again about awareness, so refer back to that one if you'd like, is celebrate the awareness. because you don't know what you don't know until you know. It's only once you know that you can have the power to do something. So first you celebrate the awareness. You practice that self-compassion we talk about. It's not my fault. If it could have been any other way, it would have been. I couldn't manage something that I had no awareness of. So offer yourself kindness and compassion, and then start to be curious and celebrate that awareness so that you're starting to rewire your brain, like we talked about in 2 episodes ago in our brain, or our computer episode in the Vehicle of Consciousness. We're starting to train our brain to welcome self-awareness opportunities and to welcome those emotions. And another thing that I tell men if they're feeling overwhelmed at the thought of letting these beach balls up is, I don't mean this in a context of invalidating how powerful emotions can be. So I don't mean to minimize it or gaslight or anything. But what I find very helpful is remembering that an emotion is nothing more than a chemical sensation in your vehicle of consciousness that will pass, which is kind of ridiculous. When I thought about all of the things I did in my life to manage my emotions, and I was hypervigilant. We often call that being an empath, which is also hypervigilantism, which is a form of PTSD, where I'm constantly scanning other people to figure out what their emotions are because I felt so unsafe in childhood. So it's like looking at like, how do people feel? But I was constantly manipulating, managing myself and others to avoid emotions. And this is most relationships. And most men I talk to, they're like, well, I don't do this because I don't want my wife to have this reaction. And we're all just walking around trying to push each other's beach balls down and judge like, okay, you can let this beach ball up, but don't keep that one down, keep that one down. And we're all walking around managing each other and manipulating each other and fighting with each other to avoid a temporary chemical sensation, physical sensation in our bodies. The day I realized that, I was sitting in a hammock pondering life like I spend most of my time doing, and I just started laughing. I had been meditating for months on end. I was in like these samadhi bliss states, and it just occurred to me how hilarious it all was, that our whole lives we are just running around trying to manage the thoughts and feelings of other people. Why? So that we can avoid feeling guilty, so that we can avoid feeling shame, so that we can avoid feeling uncomfortable, which is just a chemical sensation that passes through our body like gas or diarrhea or anything else. It's an unpleasant sensation. You let it out and it's gone. And so I remind men, you are safe. It is just a chemical sensation in your body, not to minimize its impact, but that helps me feel safe. And it helps my clients feel safe to let those beach balls up because they remember, okay, it's kind of like eating a shit sandwich. You know, like I talk about with when we learn like, okay, you're being a bully, or okay, you're invalidating your partner, or, you know, I became aware of something I was doing yesterday that I was like, oh, that's obnoxious. Don't do that. You know, it feels uncomfortable for a few seconds and then you level up. So you can remember it feels uncomfortable. The beach ball comes up, then it floats away. You become less particle, more wave. You free up more energy. It's like a level up. You level up, you level up. Every time you let those emotions find a healthy way to move through you, you let them up. And there are different tools we can use. You can study emotional intelligence, but I think it's very helpful to have experiences. So some men, I have them start by watching movies from childhood, like Old Yeller or Pixar movies, or something that will help them access emotions, just to say, now tell your body, yes, I'm safe, and allow that out. Have a good cry. I have some men that I work with where we spend a session just accessing anger, and I hold space for their anger and we let it out in healthy ways, or we let that sadness out in healthy ways. Some people like breath work or somatic work, kundalini, things that free up the stuck energy in your body. Wim Hof breathing seems to work really well for a lot of men that I work with. That's one tool that I might recommend. And again, just celebrating the awareness, being curious, and being brave enough by remembering we are a rather ridiculous human species. Bless our hearts. We are constantly triggered and avoiding and managing everybody else's emotions and everybody else's thoughts and worried about what everybody else thinks. Why? Because we're just trying to manage these chemical sensations in our avatar that might last 2 minutes and then they're gone. But when you suppress them or you judge them, what we resist persists. And if we're not listening to whatever information is within those emotions, now emotions can have information about the present moment. And I remind people that when they're about to let out a bunch of years or decades of emotional beach balls, that you don't have to know where the emotion came from. You don't make other people responsible for that emotion. You celebrate the fact that it's just coming up and moving through you. It's like a weather pattern. You know, you're the tree, the storm passes by, the sun comes out, it always does, and you let it move through you. And it's more helpful to release the emotion before you try to process it or understand it. And I usually give my clients protocols for things like that so that they can first just assume they're letting a beach ball out and they don't have to know where it came from. But if it's a situation where they're constantly getting impacted in relation to other people, then it might be information about about your wants, needs, boundaries, and values, or taking the accountability not to make others responsible for our emotions. Like we talked about in a previous episode. Did we do a triggers episode yet?
We did.
Okay, great.
It was a previous one.
So our episode about triggers, I remind us or invite us to consider that if we have a giant wound of like feeling stupid or not wanting to be seen as stupid, or we felt stupid in childhood or something, and somebody says something to us that reminds us that we don't like feeling stupid, what it is we have a wound there. Somebody else pokes the wound and we go, ow, you hurt me. Instead of taking accountability that, oh, I have a wound here. How exciting. Now I know where I need to do the work on my hero's journey. Now I know how to level up in this game because I have awareness of a weakness that I'm being guided to strengthen. Not in a emotion. I shouldn't have used that metaphor in this context. Not that emotions are weak. There's no weakness. It's just sort of like a vulnerability. It's not that vulnerability is a bad thing either. Just if there's a wound there, let me say, I need to be mindful of the words I choose. If there is a wound there, it means that we are going to have a harder time connecting with other people. And again, if we're not practicing healthy emotional expression or understanding or curiosity or release, what happens, like we talked about in our parts work episode, one of those parts from the subconscious, if it's not being given a seat at the table of our consciousness, if we're invalidating its anger, if we're invalidating its sadness, if we're invalidating its jealousy, if we're trying to stop it and block it and resist it, it persists. And if we don't give it a chance to hold the talking stick, it does a hostile takeover from the subconscious, grabs control of our vehicle of consciousness, takes over the brain, takes over the emotional navigation system, and you're not piloting that vehicle anymore. One of your subconscious parts are, because they're pissed, because you're not seeing them. And that part of you doesn't feel that love and belonging. So if we have a part of us that feels sadness, and you judge that part, and you avoid that part, or you invalidate that part, and you judge it, and you try to make it go away, and you suppress it, over time, that part is going to feel more and more separate from you. That part's not going to feel love and belonging. So it's going to get a bit mischievous or a little bit clever with its strategies to get its needs met. The same as you and I having this conversation, Austra. You and I are different perspectives of source consciousness. And if you and I don't feel love and belonging, we're more likely to have conflict if we don't feel seen or heard, or every time you speak, I go, that's dumb. Or don't say that to me, or I invalidate you. You're going to start to get agitated and you're going to start to act out. But no different than you and I are fractals of source consciousness within us. We have those different fractals of our personality, like we talked about in parts work. So if we're not giving those parts a seat at the table, they're more likely to do those hostile takeovers where we think, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Or we become blind, develop blind spots about the ways that we're showing up in our more obnoxious, ridiculous, suboptimal behavior strategies in order to avoid feeling like a bad person or feeling guilt or shame, which again is a sensation in our body that's actually very helpful to tell us what part of the vehicle needs a little tune-up, and what part of us wants to be given a seat in that vehicle so that you can stay in the driver's seat, so that you're piloting that vehicle. You're not having your inner child or little inner 5-year-olds or 7-year-olds, or again, you're not having the software from before the age of 7 years old run the whole system for you.
Yeah.
So starting to get curious and starting to get comfortable with emotions and starting to learn about emotions is really the biggest game changer, and usually one of the last things that my clients want to do when they seek me out. But it's definitely something they find a lot of benefit in doing.
Yeah. For reference, the parts episode is episode 10 and triggers are episode 11. Anybody who wants to go back and listen to those.
Great. And do we not also have an episode about now, like we talked about in changing, we want to address any part of us that is in resistance before we make a change. We talked about that in 2 episodes ago in the episode about the brain, the computer of your vehicle of consciousness. So we did an episode about emotional objections. And these are the objections that I've heard time and time again that the fears men have, or the resistance they have, episode 12, to giving up control or to letting those beach balls out. So if you're listening to this one, I also recommend referring back to that one, because again, if we have parts of us in resistance and we're like 3 steps forward, 5 steps back, 3 steps forward, 5 steps back, but if we can get all of our parts on board and we can remember that you're going to be safe. I remind men all the time, you're safe to feel emotions, and we can find healthy ways to express emotions, even anger, even the emotions we judge. For some people, for me, I had no trouble accessing sadness, which on the scale of consciousness or the scale of emotions would be lower than anger. But I often stayed in powerlessness because I couldn't access anger. So if I see a client that comes to me very despondent, very depressed, very sort of like just sort of given up, and I see them go into anger, I'm like, yes, because I know they're out of powerlessness and into power. Now, do I want them to stay in anger forever? No, but I want to observe. I want to congratulate them. And if I was like, oh, don't be angry, then they'd go, okay, and they'd fall back into hopelessness. Or in the inverse of that, I have a family I'm working with right now who are very skillful in anger. They are very skillful. They all express anger. It doesn't even faze them. And they don't access things like sadness, despair, worry, disappointment, things like that, because they feel more empowered going to anger. So they don't know how to drop into the softer parts. So it's not, it's just every individual I work with has a different sort of relationship or different crayons that they might be holding. So it's not always a one size fits all. It's sort of like it's more of a, let's see how many crayons we have without making any of them mean anything.
Yeah, it's actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask. Why is it that we tend to take emotions personally, or what can help to not take them personally and more so look at them the way you're describing them as KPIs of kind of some valuable information that's there?
So I always try to remember that emotions are information. And the same as once we really take on board that we're accountable for our own emotions, not that other people can't impact us. Like if somebody is being rude to you or invalidating you and not meeting your needs or violating your boundaries, you can skillfully communicate that to them in a loving way that doesn't invalidate them. Then you're going to be less likely to judge others when they're in an emotion. Because remember in the episode of software where we talked about the brain 2 episodes ago in the vehicle of consciousness, we talked that 90 to 95% of our perceptual awareness, the thoughts we think, the way we feel, the way we speak, blah, 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 are based on subconscious programs from before the age of 7. And because we're in the emotional dark ages, we all have, I'm really generalizing again, I'd like to acknowledge, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of wounds. Men have a lot of trauma and a lot of wounds that they have not looked at. So our emotions are information. They're priceless information. And when we really understand that, we can become curious about others and think, what information is this telling me about their suboptimal programming? You know, what are they feeling right now? So if somebody is feeling really angry, I don't let them violate my boundaries. I don't let them hurt me. But if they're freaking out or getting angry, I think in my head, I think, okay, what is this telling me about what they're experiencing? And if they're in a hostile takeover from one of their parts and they're quote unquote unconscious, or like they're in that, they're not in awareness anymore. They're not the writer, director, and producer of their movie. They're in the, they're just playing a script that they don't even know about. Then is not the time for me to deliver to them information. I'm going to meet them where they're at. I'm going to help them release that emotion. I'm going to try to diffuse that, let that beach ball come up, and make them feel seen and heard and understood before I try to deliver information. Because if we're in a fear state or a panic state, those are not logical states. So logic doesn't always help them. So we have to let that emotion out before we try to analyze what it is. Connect before we correct. Connect before we correct. I say that all the time to clients, especially when I'm working with couples. Connect before you correct. So eventually, over time, we start to see everything as information. We take it personally because we're an incredibly shame-filled species who are trying to avoid our own feelings and instead playing emotional hot potato. So a feeling comes up and we're like, oh, I don't want that, you feel it. Or I've had partners, and I've probably been this way too. I've definitely participated in unhealthy emotional patterns in relationships before I became aware. Definitely. But you'll notice that if you're feeling a certain way, it's like, it almost makes you feel better. It's not healthy, but it almost makes you feel better to push it out or to make it with somebody else responsible for it. Because again, we're trying to manage these sensations in our bodies, and we're as a species, we're covered in lots of micro traumas because we're living in the emotional dark ages. So we're constantly making everybody else's behavior mean something about ourselves. And even if somebody was directly saying something like, "You're stupid and fat," it'd be like, okay. If you are worried, if you have a wound about being stupid or fat, you're probably going to flip out. But if somebody else is like, "You're stupid and fat," and you're like, "Well, I'm not stupid or fat," just because somebody else, this is something a tool I teach people. Every word we speak and think is either medicine or poison. And a lot of us think and speak. We're sloppy with what we think and speak. So if somebody else serves you poison, it's not because you deserve poison, it's because they're filled with poison. Or if somebody is giving you helpful feedback, like, "Hey, you're a bully," and you get really agitated, again, so you treat everything like information. You're like, is that true? You should be like, maybe I am a bully. But if you're not a bully and you were bullied as a kid, you might get really triggered by being called a bully. Or, I had a lot of confusion about intelligence in childhood because I was a gifted child, but I was so bored in school, and I have ADHD, and I was so severely bullied. I didn't do well in school, and I was always thinking differently than other people. And over time, I thought, maybe I'm dumb, because I just think what everybody else does it's fairly ridiculous. Like, I didn't understand why people were hurting each other and lying to each other and manipulating each other, and I didn't know what it all meant. So, or people, because I had ADHD and I was very bored in our very slow school system, slow for me, I would, teachers would say, "Pay attention. You're not living up to your potential. Don't be lazy." So it would be a trigger for somebody like me to be called stupid. So again, these emotions are information that over time, if we heal enough wounds, we can become almost trigger proof. And that's a really fun place to be. And I was actually rarely triggered for years until I got into a deep emotional relationship with my partner. And then I became aware of more beach balls that get to come up, or more wounds that I had not healed, because some wounds need to be healed sort of within the container of a relationship because they're relational wounds. So again, it's information that I can then go process and think, oh, what is this informing me of? Is this a boundary that's been violated that I do not tolerate for myself? Or is this a wound from childhood? Or is this just an emotion I judge? Like I said, I have a lot of I overcame a lot of struggle accessing emotions like anger. I'm very comfortable with sadness, but I was not comfortable with anger. And a lot of men are the opposite. They're very comfortable with anger, but not comfortable with sadness. So again, it's all just information. And as we evolve out of the emotional dark ages and we learn different skills to achieve this need of love and belonging, it's very helpful to just have a lot of curiosity about what's going on with yourself, what's going on with other people, and what these emotional beach balls are teaching us on how to heal and evolve humanity out of the emotional dark ages. And that takes brave evolutionary leaders and men and women and everybody, non-binary, anybody, anywhere on the spectrum, just looking at things differently and starting to get comfortable feeling our emotions without making other people responsible for them, so that we're all sort of skillfully piloting our vehicle of consciousness on the road of authentic alignment and our most magnetic, enlightened, again, I don't like to use that word, our most magnetic, fulfilling, enjoyable lives, I just think is a win-win for humanity.
And going into understanding that information, can we briefly touch on emotional intelligence and even explaining what it is and what's the importance of it, or what are some of the ways how it can be improved?
Yeah, I mean, so we used to talk about mostly IQ, that type of intelligence. And there's lots of different types of intelligence. There could be spiritual intelligence. There could be, emotional intelligence is something, again, that's now being used as a higher, as a higher EQ is a KPI that will indicate more successful life than high IQ. So there are lots of books that can be read on EQ. There's no shame in having a low EQ. Again, it doesn't mean anything about you. It just means that's a skill you need to learn, like the piano. Some people are born, like I said, some people are born being able to play the piano with perfect pitch, and some people are not. And some men, a lot of men on the planet, like I said, were cut off. We're all in this together. Like I say, women raised men, we're all in this together. It's not about judging or blame. It's just about how do we heal together. So there's no problem with having a low EQ. You can take courses. I've taken emotional intelligence, like how to teach leaders, because I worked a lot with leaders and entrepreneurs, and how EQ plays into leadership. You could take a course. You could work with a therapist. You could work with a coach. There's lots of books you can read. Again, it's being curious and celebrating the awareness. So instead of beating yourself up for what you did when you didn't know better, it's celebrating the awareness that, hey, this used to be out of my control because it was out of my awareness. Now that it's in my awareness, I can be curious about it and develop this skill.
Yeah. I think we covered most of the things that I wanted to touch on. Maybe we could also talk a bit. I think you already addressed it about emotions that are preferred versus not preferred to feel, and even as men work through emotions and move higher in that scale, does it mean that the negative emotions just go away, or they're just like not there?
Right. Okay. So I'll answer your question, and then please bring me back if there's something else that I didn't address that would be helpful for our listeners. So I think that different people have different emotions they judge. And a lot of that, again, is that software or that programming from before the age of 7. What got you approval in your house? What made you feel closer to your parents, peers, society, church, culture, whatever it is? And what made you feel an emotional push away? How did you fit in? So let's take one that people love to feel sticky about, crunchy about, which is anger. So again, in some houses, if you say grew up with a very angry parent who is very ragey, you would judge anger as bad or wrong and scary. So what would either happen is you would suppress your own anger like I did, like, well, I don't feel anger, and it would just leak out in unhealthy ways. Or I would drink, or I would do anything, or I would just or become blind to my own anger. Or the other thing is they are angry people that are blind to their own anger because they judge it. It's not an emotion they prefer. It's not an emotion that fits their self-concept. So then they'll be like, I'm not angry, you're angry. Or they'll go around judging anger in everybody else. And it's like that pot calling the kettle black. And you think, what? Because they might be blind to their own anger. Or like me, they might suppress their anger because they're like, anger is scary. And that's a position that we put men in with, because unhealthily, emotions that are not allowed to surface, those beach balls that are not allowed to surface in a healthy way, again, are more likely to lead to those hostile takeovers where we act out that anger in unhealthy ways. Or if a man is feeling sad and he doesn't know how to feel sad, or he thinks sadness is weak, and he starts being angry at his family is going to become afraid of him, potentially. And so it's finding healthy ways to process the emotions that we judge. Like, we tend to think that, maybe we would like passion, enthusiasm, optimism, hopefulness, joy, bliss, happiness. Those are like the emotions we prefer. And the emotions we judge or don't prefer are anger, revenge, jealousy, insecurity, guilt, unworthiness, fear, depression, despair, powerlessness, blame, disappointment. But emotions are kind of a package deal. And over time, the amount of time we spend in the emotions we don't prefer will become less. But even for myself, that spent months or years in bliss states or samadhi states or mostly happy states, those other emotions do come up from time to time. It just might become from 20/80 to 80/20 over time. And when I spent long periods of time in mostly sort of states of bliss or joy, something I became aware of is that over time, without any variation to that emotion itself becomes neutrality, which itself almost becomes boredom, or it becomes frustration because there's no variation to it. So over time, we're going to have less down. So we can, when we're in those states, how long does it take for us to become aware? What is the frequency? What is the duration? What is the intensity? That's how we can measure our success over time. And at the beginning, when you're releasing old beach balls, you're probably going to feel more of the emotions you don't prefer. But once you free up all that energy, on the other side of that, you've got all that energy that you've freed up. So it's almost like the phoenix burning in the ashes so it can arise once again. Or occasionally visiting, I don't like to use the word lower states, less preferred states, so that when we're in gratitude and positive and optimism and hopefulness and contentment, it feels sweeter because we experience that opposite or that polarity. And this is a planet of polarities currently. Over time, I think we're neutralizing some of those polarities, but currently in this snapshot in humanity, there's a lot of polarity on this planet. And I think that's part of the, if we wanted to look at it through whatever lens, that might be part of the reason we would want to incarnate here, is because there is a lot of polarity. There's a lot of excitement. We get to feel these chemical sensations in our avatar. And when we are piloting that vehicle of consciousness, that's very exciting. But again, when our parts are piloting the vehicle of consciousness, we're running suboptimal software, the heart battery is not charged, the gas tank is low, and the emotional navigation system is offline. You'd be like, why would anybody ever want to come to this planet? Because it's not fun. You don't feel like you're empowered. So there you go around trying to control everything, trying to control your own emotions, trying to control everybody else's emotions, and then judging jealousy, hatred, rage, revenge, anger, discouragement, blame, worry, shame, guilt, and all of the emotions that we don't prefer, that actually should get an equal seat at the table of our consciousness, because we are an emotional species. And the more we judge an emotion or try to avoid emotion, as Carl Jung said, that I've repeated many times, what we resist persists. So letting that energy and motion pass through, finding a healthy way to express it, scheduling time to cry. I have a client who works as a homicide detective. And he's like, he's accessing a lot of his emotions now and really stepping into that heart battery and charging that heart battery. And he's like, well, how do I feel all these emotions and get my job done? And I'm like, that is a very valid question. And I have another client this week that talked to me about that. And we looked at strategies of like scheduling time so that we're not invalidating that part. Schedule time, Friday at 6 p.m. where you're going to sit down and feel your feelings, and you're sit down and let your parts be heard. You're going to sit down and have a cry. Or, if you're feeling angry, I have a few clients that struggle with that used to struggle with a lot of anger. So I find healthy ways for them to release anger that in my house previously, we had a red plastic baseball bat and a room with some pillows on it. And if you're angry, go let that out. If you're angry, feel angrier than any person has felt in the history of ever. Don't take it out on other people. Don't make other people responsible for it. Just go in, bash that baseball bat, stomp your feet up and down, have a temper tantrum like a kid. Look at kids. They feel some sort of way in the grocery store. They have a meltdown. And then they're like, okay, let's go play. As adults, we're like, oh, there's an emotion coming up. Oh God, it's your fault. Or I don't feel it, or push it down, or whatever we do to manage it, instead of just letting it rise up, not judging each other, or coming together and saying, oh my gosh, you're feeling angry or sad. How can I presence this with you?
Yeah.
And then those emotions over time, we're going to shake them off. Animals, they get in fights. I used to work in canine behavior sciences, and I would watch dogs fight each other. And 5 minutes later, they would literally physically shake it off and go. And they'd be like, okay, let's go. Best friends again. No problem. They have the tools to. Now, also, there's a layer of trauma in there too. So if people have a certain trauma about something, they're not going to be able to shake it off as easily. They're going to want to work through that trauma and whatever. There are so many healing modalities, and different tools work for different people. So just if you try something that doesn't work for you, that's okay. You didn't fail. It just means it's not the right tool. Don't use a hammer, use a screwdriver, just try different tools, and you find one that works for you to both reprogram the software, release the beach balls in your body, let them out without making anybody else responsible for them, and then reprogramming that software, charging that heart battery, and practicing a lot of that compassion to yourself and compassion to others, and giving yourself permission to be an evolutionary leader, willing to model to other men what it looks like to be a man and what masculinity, divine, sacred masculine looks like in the new version of humanity that we are co-creating currently.
Yeah. Well, that's navigation system in summary.
Yeah, so that's our emotional navigation system, and it's important, and it's exciting, and it's overwhelming, and it can be really challenging because, like you pointed out, and I've seen a lot, men quite literally don't even know that those crayons exist, or they don't know what it feels like, or they feel terrified to let them out, especially if there are things that they think are scary, like anger or sadness or self-pity or whatever it is. It's better out than in. And Dr. David Hawkins agreed. He used to say, he wrote a book called Power versus Force. And there's also one that we'll put in the show notes. What was it? Called Letting Go, which is very good. He talks about the emotional navigation system. There's an emotional guidance scale that I think would also be helpful for us to share, that I think you said you were going to put in the show notes. So something else I'd like to say before we close off is that when we're in an emotional state, we're not trying to go from 0 to hero. So there is an emotional guidance scale that's not absolute truth, but I think it's one of the most helpful models I've seen. And it ranks emotions from number 1 to number 22. So number 1 would be joy, knowledge, empowerment, freedom, love, appreciation. Halfway down at 8, 6 would be hopefulness, contentment, boredom. And then 17 would be anger, 18 would be revenge, 19 hatred, jealousy, whatever they are. And I invite you not to rank them as in higher is better. Don't make it a competition with yourself, because that won't be helpful, but very natural. And I would definitely want to do that also. But it looks at, so if you're, say, in number 20, which is jealousy, you're not necessarily going to jump from 20 to 1 or 2, joy and passion. But if you go from jealousy and then you're in anger, you've gone from 20 to 17. You've leveled up. And then when you go into disappointment, you've gone from 17 to 12. And you're like, okay. And then you might go into being overwhelmed or frustrated. Well, now you're in 10. Now you're halfway up the scale. then you might be in pessimism. Well, pessimism is 8 points above where you started. So again, it's not about judging or measuring or having a competition. It's just about being able to reprogram your brain to perceive emotions differently by constantly having compassion and celebrating yourself, and not expecting yourself to be in 1, 2, and 3 all the time, because it's not a contest. And anybody who says they don't feel any of those other ones is probably emotionally bypassing. So again, everything you feel is valid. Often what we feel is not caused by what we believe it's caused by. But the thing that I see people miss is when they remember that everything they feel is valid, what that also means is that everything everybody else feels is valid. It's all just information. And practicing tools to let those emotional beach balls out, whether it be through therapy, coaching, dance, working out. And again, we don't want to be doing those things to get rid of emotions. So I've had clients who do yoga or breath work because they're like, it helps me control my emotions. I tell men, or I hear men at least once a week when I'm going through their intake forms or doing sessions or groups, I say, what's your relationship like with your emotions? And they say, I'm really good at controlling my emotions. Or if I go for a run, I can very much control my emotions. And while we should healthily manage our emotions in certain situations, like at work, at the boardroom or whatever, we're not safe to experience all emotions in all settings. That's not realistic. The goal is not to suppress, avoid, or control those emotions. It's to understand those emotions, to allow those emotions so that they pass through more quickly. So some people I have a client who's done yoga, breathwork, meditation, spiritual practices for decades, literally decades, but still didn't feel great. And what I observed, or what I invited him to consider, was that he was doing all of those things to manage or change or avoid the parts of him that he did not approve of. So all of those tools he was doing were from an energy of shame and guilt and avoidance and resistance, rather than an energy of self-acceptance, allowance, awareness. So again, I've said this before, it's often the energy behind the tool more than the tool itself. So it's about allowing those emotions, being curious about those emotions. And imagine if you have a child who's feeling sad or feeling angry, or who comes home, Dad, this kid punched me at school and I think I'm stupid and fat and I hate everything and I want to, and flipping out. You're not going to be like, well, you might be. And if you're doing this, then we should have a conversation about more updating your parenting strategies, which is not a judgment. It's valid and very healthy to look at what ways we're not doing things well. But it wouldn't be helpful for that child to try to stop them or be like, okay, I need you to leave, get out of here. That's what we used to do, right? In parenting. Okay, you're angry, you're sad. I need you to go to your room until you're feeling better. That's not love and belonging. That's separation. And that trains kids to judge their own emotions. So when a child is having an emotion, what do they want? They want closeness. They want connection. They want to be seen and heard. And they're not going to be logical, even if they're having a meltdown that they can't have an ice cream. You're not going to be like, okay, but that's not healthy for you and you can't have that right now. They're not going to stop the middle of the meltdown and go, oh, ice cream's not healthy for me? Thank you. That's very helpful information. You got to let them have that meltdown first. You got to let that emotion pass before you can get into their logic. Right?
Yep.
And you don't want to judge them. You can say, I understand you're feeling, you don't have to say, I'm going to give you ice cream, but you say, I understand you're feeling sad or scared or angry right now. I love you. I'm here with you. Tell me when you're feeling better. It's okay to feel angry. And then they're going to feel close and connected to you. And then when they're done, you're going to have that conversation. I understand you want ice cream. I love ice cream too. And I wish I could eat ice cream for breakfast too. But here's why we're not going to, blah, blah, blah. But you're going to let them have that temper tantrum first, right? And you're going to not punish them or push them away. So again, if we're having these emotional beach balls come up, we're trying to avoid or manage or suppress or push away our emotions. We're like, I have to do breath work so I don't feel this, or I have to do this so I'm going to go running so that I can control my emotions. That's very normal, but it's suboptimal. So we want to bring those parts of us, bring those emotions close, let them pass without making them mean anything, be curious, see if they have any helpful information, and then go about our merry way. And when other people are experiencing emotions, we be curious about them too. A lot of men tell me, they're like, well, I don't want my wife to be upset, or I don't want my wife to be angry. I don't want my wife to be this. So they're constantly doing things out of their own authentic alignment to manage the emotion of their wife, or they're making the emotions of their wife mean that they're failing, or they're judging the emotions of their wife, or they're, and it just doesn't help either external relationships or internal relationships with their own parts.
Yeah.
But it's very normal, and there's no shame in it. That's what we were taught. So it's not, and that's what our parents are taught. That's what our grandparents are taught. It's never about blame. It's just about, hey, we got some crappy software in humanity. Let's be evolutionary leaders and figure out who's going to change it, who's going to reprogram it. And let's model that behavior to other men and other children and other women and other non-binary and other anybody.
Yeah. So with this, there might be some people listening, and if you have any questions, you can always ask them. There's a link under each show notes. There's a link where you can ask questions. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, you can ask questions there, because this is a lengthy and in-depth topic that there can be a lot of questions or a lot of misunderstandings that can come up as you're listening. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and we can address them in some future episodes.
Yeah, we're going to do episodes where we just answer the questions that we've been getting. And so we appreciate that. Reach out. And you can also book a strategy session with me where we map out your unique magnetic masculinity blueprint, because everybody is different. This blueprint is, I think, a very helpful model. It's just a model. It's not a fact. It's a model that can help, in my experience that I've created over the decades, that can help us more quickly experience results, because knowing things is very different than experiencing things. You shouldn't necessarily take my word for anything or believe something I say unless you experience it. But having said that, everybody is a little different. So if you want to accelerate your results and experience what it's like to work with me, or explore that relationship of potentially working together, just book a free strategy session where we'll map out your unique magnetic masculinity blueprint. And if nothing else, you'll walk away with a lot more clarity, and you'd be surprised. You'd be very surprised what we can achieve in 1 hour.
Yeah. And the next week, we are touching on the last piece of vehicle of consciousness, which is the vehicle itself.
Right. How to have more energy, how to fuel our body, which is not going to be a lecture about what you should and shouldn't eat. Everybody has different eating styles, plant-based, animal-based. I don't care what your eating style is. It's just about starting to be aware, or use that metacognition we talked about in our awareness episode, of understanding what provides our vehicle units of energy and what depletes our body of units of energy. Because it doesn't matter how great all the systems are running if there's no gas in the tank, the fluids are low, and the engine's overheating, or there's too many tabs open. So it's looking at what energizes us, what drains us, and some of the common suboptimal habits that I see, and how to change them so that you are sleeping well, eating well, and full of energy, so you have tons of energy to spend on all the activities that you prefer doing. And because you're going to be enjoying your life so much, piloting that vehicle of consciousness down to your authentic alignment, living your most magnetic life, you're going to want energy to do that.
Yeah. So that's the next week's topic. And if you have any questions for that one, feel free to reach out as well.
Thanks so much. And we'll see you next week. Bye for now.